If you are here, you have taken an active role in bettering your life, no matter what stage of life you are in. The Banyan Treatment Center's podcast will discuss many topics like recovery, addiction, self-help, mental health, and so much more. It will provide you with tools to succeed, ideas for recovering, and how-tos on creating a better life. My name is Alyssa, and today's episode is about the effects of drug addiction on family members. Today on our panel, we have Jason Sheppard and Richard Mayora. We'll go around the room quickly and let them introduce themselves. Richard, why don't we start with you?
Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a certified addictions professional. I work here at Banyan with mostly now clients with trauma, VA veterans that are seeking outpatient services. And I've been at Banyan for several years, working in both mental health and substance use disorder.
Thank you. Well, we're so excited to have you today. And here we have Jason.
Hello. I am the Military and Veterans Admissions Supervisor at Banyan. I work with families every day with alcoholics and addicts. I'm in long-term recovery myself. Plus, I have lots of experience with, addiction and on my side of the family with myself and also with loved ones I've cared about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. And I'm super excited to get into this topic and spread some information and knowledge to everybody. Drug and alcohol addiction can change the lives of addicts in detrimental and sometimes deadly ways. But people tend to forget its effects on the family members and friends of the individual with an addiction. They're on the sidelines, watching their loved ones lose themselves to the throes of addiction. Today, we're going to take a deeper look into those effects of addiction on the lives of family members. So our first question here is, why are people who have an alcoholic family member more prone to becoming an alcoholic themselves? Richard, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Sure. I find that the most interesting question that I get asked all the time when people find out what I do is, why don't they just stop? And they don't understand the nature of the illness. And I think the single thing that most people are surprised to hear is that a significant number of people actually use with their own parents.
Yeah.
So they've set an example, and it doesn't matter what drug it is. It's really shocking, but it's not just alcohol. I think a lot of times it's a learned behavior. Families that do have addiction often have mental health issues. There's often a lot of chaos. Using alcohol and drugs is a coping mechanism.
Right.
And especially in a family where there's probably a lot of dysfunction going on.
No, thank you so much for that. That was perfect. And it kind of, brings up that topic of nature versus nurture. It's both. As we've learned when it comes to addiction and alcoholism, like if they are genetically predisposed to having addiction issues in their family, then learning and seeing these other behaviors that are learned, partying, abusing alcohol, abusing drugs, it's more common for somebody to start doing that as well. Jason, what about you? What do you have to say on this topic?
For me, personal experience, my family has a huge history of alcoholism and addiction in it already. Out of my father and his 3 siblings, they were all alcoholics except for one of them.
Wow.
Right? And even on my mom's side. And for me personally, I witnessed my father coming home intoxicated, several other things because he was intoxicated. But so the environment we lived in was pretty unhealthy, so me, my brother, and my sister, we all became alcoholics and addicts, and like to say, I knew, now looking at it, I could tell back then that we were all going to be, just because of some of the behaviors we had that were learned from our environmental situation.
So let's jump into the roles that the families play in addiction, because there's many different roles that a family member might take, right? So here we have a list of them, and then we can kind of talk about what each of them means, right? So typically you see in a family, there's an enabler, a hero, a scapegoat, mascot, lost child, and then of course the addict. So let's go into a little bit of what that means.
Well, the enabler is sometimes the caretaker as well, and there can be more than one. I work with families a lot on this issue because a lot of times they're very frustrated and don't know what to do and don't trust their own judgment. And I remind them first that you enable because you love this person, because you want to spare them the consequences of their using. But unfortunately, every time you save them, every time you enable these kind of negative behaviors to persist, you're actually preventing them from getting well. And so they need to learn to step back. They need to learn to teach their loved one to be more independent and to own their recovery. And I think it's very difficult when it's something like, your child gets arrested for the third time, and I might say, well, maybe leaving them in jail for the night might be the thing that is the wake-up call for them to get the help they need.
That's funny you say that, because, I watched my mother enable my father so many times. I mean, she married and divorced him twice.
Wow.
Right? So, I mean, the first time should have been enough, right? But then, I mean, I watched my mother enable me only because I, magically worked my manipulation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was 35 and ended up in jail, and she finally cut me off.
Wow.
And it was that situation right there that brought me into recovery, But until that happened, I was going to continue, so.
So what would you say is the hero? What does that mean?
I would say typically, the hero would be maybe the older child, the one that's trying to keep everything together, very prone to perfection.
Yeah.
So setting themselves up for lots of heartache because it's impossible to maintain perfection in a household like that.
Right.
So that would be my definition of the hero.
Yeah, and sometimes they also don't want to examine the real gritty parts of the problem. It's very superficial a lot of the time to kind of keep the family in a positive mind frame, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are engaged in all of the details to truly get at the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just real quick, I kind of feel like I was in that role. I was the youngest, though, but my brother and sister ran away at an early age. So I was the one that went to school, went to church, graduated a year early, and I strived really hard for that perfection, but just too hard to maintain.
Oh, I'm sure.
But
it's a lot of pressure
Yeah.
for the hero, it sounds like.
Yeah, I agree.
So what would you guys describe the scapegoat as?
Well, lots of families have that bad kid, and unfortunately, it's very interesting now when I'm around children, and especially I'm like a great uncle now, I'm very cognizant of these labels because they become self-fulfilling prophecies. They become ways that people become very indoctrinated, and these roles can go, for an extended period. And the scapegoat is always the first kid everybody looks at if something goes wrong, and oftentimes they're not even believed when they're telling the truth, and so we have to make sure that we allow people to be themselves and not get pigeonholed into these boxes. They're quite dangerous, and they can actually last a lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. I think the scapegoat's got a sad part, just because they end up taking the brunt of maybe whatever the alcoholic parent is causing to the non-alcoholic parent, right? So that's a definitely tough situation. I see my brother and sister both experience that.
Okay, so what about the mascot? What is this role?
Oh, the family jester, the person who tries to break the tension, the person who's often like the family clown, the person who's often irreverent and can cause some trouble by making fun of some of these difficult situations. But the intentions are good, but it sometimes can backfire and be very detrimental.
What about the lost child? What is the lost child?
This is the one that would probably be a little more isolated than the others, may have difficulty in social situations, could possibly, really be into like a fantasy play role, since so isolated, they just create this existence or this life for themselves outside of reality,
And unfortunately, in a chaotic household, this might also be a child who's a little self-sufficient and gets neglected.
It's like all the attention is going towards the addict that's struggling. So there's the one child that's not getting the attention that they deserve, basically, is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for this information. And I think that it's going to be super helpful for families that are struggling to be able to identify, like, wow, that's me. And to realize that they're not alone in this, that there are millions of other families that are struggling with this and identify in the same way. So hopefully they can get the support that they need to help them with the role that they are currently playing, and ultimately to get the person that they love that's struggling the help that they need.
Yes.
In what ways do you guys believe an entire family is affected by alcoholism?
What ways are they not? That's
So
my
true.
question. I mean, and just speaking from experience, every possible way. I mean, for me, the amount of instability, abuse, and violence, just really your safety, your stability, your confidence, lack of confidence, everything for me was a question. I was completely just consumed by fear always.
Yeah.
Always in fear, always scared, and just really unsure of who and what I am and where I belong. So I don't know. I would like to see what roles aren't affected, because I've just seen the complete dark side of it, I guess you would say. So I don't know. For me, it's a lot.
And I know you said you've been on both sides of it. I also have been as well. And, being on the addict side of things, you think like life is so horrible, it's the absolute worst, but it's like they almost have the advantage because they're the one using the drugs to numb themselves of this. Your loved ones aren't using drugs. They are living in constant paranoia, fear, just waiting for their phone to ring to tell them that their loved one is long gone, was in a car accident, they found them somewhere. Like, that is a level of PTSD that people don't think about, or don't really understand unless they've been in the situation. And why it's so important for us to talk about this is, whether you're a family member or an addict or alcoholic listening to this, to realize, like, this is what you're doing to your loved ones, Like, it's not just about you. Yes, you're the one that's struggling, but you're creating so much more chaos than you can even comprehend.
Yeah, having the ability to see both sides, it's like I also was the enabler too, but it's very tough. For me, this is just my personal opinion, but I feel like the family suffers more.
Yeah.
Completely. So when I'm on the phone or face to face with family members, I can relate to them and let them know that I've been there, and I know that they're struggling more. PTSD, especially if you have PTSD from your childhood, and then you have to relive the same types of situations, except you're on the opposite end, is very tough. I mean, it was difficult for me, but the enabling part and all the other roles that I played has reversed.
Yeah.
And so it's been difficult and a real eye-opening experience, but I love the fact that I can relate now, because that's something that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
As a tool.
Well, I will say that for a lot of families, I hope that they get the care that they need, because, I do family groups every single week, and I'm amazed that people, for example, have found their child blue in the bathtub, or they've had strangers coming to their house selling drugs at 2:00 in the morning, and they've had these experiences that are very traumatic, and they don't get care for themselves because they're so focused on the needs of the addict all the time.
So an interesting statistic that we have listed here, alcoholism and addiction has been linked with higher divorce rates. Why do you guys think that is?
I had a client recently who's a middle-aged woman who had no mental health history at all, whose husband's addiction alone sent her into long-term care.
Wow.
He couldn't hold down a job. He destroyed their finances. There were legal charges, so there were restitution to pay, legal fees, and those things are incredibly stressful. But also just their unpredictable behavior and the constant lying and all the deception that erodes the intimacy of a relationship. So it's perfectly understandable that this is a major reason why somebody couldn't stay married. It's just it's pretty basic, and it violates a lot of the trust that somebody fundamentally can have. So it's pretty self-explanatory that this would be a major cause for divorce.
Yeah, relationships are tough anyways.
Right. With or without alcoholism or addiction. It's work.
That's very true. So when you mix that, whether you have one or both partners that are either alcoholic or addicts, it's just so tough to maintain relationships when you're under the influence, if you have children, a family, jobs, homes, career, so it's not a surprise to me. I mean, I I went through that as a child. I mean, I see it all the time, with my nieces, same thing.
No, it really makes sense when you lay it out like that. Relationships take work, and addiction and alcoholism can be very selfish. So how can you be a partner to someone else when all you're doing is feeding your addiction? So let's go a little bit into codependency and how it relates to alcoholism or addiction in relationships, because we see a lot of people experiencing codependency problems as family members when we have somebody entering into treatment.
Well,
so let me read my notes real quick.
well, no, I just think it's interesting. If you look up codependency, it says it's an emotional and behavioral condition that makes it difficult to have relationships.
Yeah.
I still struggle with that today. I think some of it has to do with other stuff, but the codependency part is huge especially between the enabler and the addict. That's crucial right there. And
well, codependency and enabling are very similar, obviously.
Right, right. So it's definitely a topic that needs to be addressed in the family.
Oh, absolutely. And the person who's codependent often may have trauma themselves. They may have low self-esteem.
Yeah.
They have certain dependent traits, and they're deriving their self-esteem from someone else's accomplishments, basically.
Yep.
And so here's the drug holding the addict hostage, and they're kind of vicariously living through this experience, and they're not respecting their own boundaries and needs. And that's why they're typically most often parents and or spouses, and they become extremely resentful when the addict or alcoholic is not doing what they're supposed to do for their recovery. And they have to learn to set appropriate boundaries and take care of themselves and allow the addict or alcoholic to work their own program.
You see it so often, and it really is such a shame. It's like they'll stay in these relationships because they know that they care about that person, and they know it's a good person, but they're like, if only they can get past the addiction part, like they would be such a great person. It's like, how many years are you going to hold out for this? Like this person has to be able to help themselves. All right. So we are almost finished here. Our last question that I want to touch on is just like, how do we help families and addicts get the help that they need? Like, what suggestions can you offer to those that are currently struggling and have a loved one that's dealing with addiction? Like, what should we tell them to do?
I get no financial compensation for this, but there is a book called The Addict and the Family by Beverly Conyers, and every family member I have recommended this book to comes back to group a week later with a huge sigh of relief saying, now I get it. This book talks about how the addict brain doesn't exactly function properly, but how you can also take care of yourself, and how you basically don't have to have a ticket to their circus. You can live a respectable, happy life, and it's not going to be dependent on whether your loved one is sober or not. It doesn't mean that you don't care, but it means that you're not going to be helpful to them also if you're living your life in chaos because of their addiction.
Right.
But I'd say the most important thing and the most primary thing is to educate yourself, because if you do not understand that this is a disease and that there are ways to arrest the disease and to have people live happy, productive lives, then you're going to be at a loss. I still don't understand. I tell families all the time, if your loved one had a heart attack or diabetes, you'd want to know every detail about what you needed to know. But when it comes to mental health or addiction, they cover their eyes and say, just bring them home well. And that's just not the way it works, because as a family member, you play a role in their recovery. And I would encourage clients, I tell them all the time, ask your loved ones if there's whatever they can do for you in your recovery. It's not just about paying your bills. It's not just about being on the other end of the phone. This is an opportunity to have very transparent, successful, open relationships with them that are genuine and not based on, just a past history. So I think it's incumbent on the clients to, the families are wanting to know what to do. That's why they come to these groups.
Right.
They're always frustrated, and they feel like they're in a minefield and don't know what to do next. But, if you are very open about what you need for your recovery, I'm sure that you'll have a much better outcome.
I would say that I would leave them with one, lead by example, right? You can't have anybody do anything you're not going to do yourself. And second is to set very healthy boundaries and stick to them. right? And be able to recognize where you're able to help and where you may hurt, you know, and allow the people that are around you, professionals or whatnot, do what they need to do for yourself or your family members. You know, for here at Banyan and our military and veterans team, we're not bound by some of the things that family members are, so we can continue to work tirelessly with you know, the addict and the alcoholic or with the family members. And so, you know, once that opportunity is given and we have a chance to work with family and addicts, I think that we bring a big relief to them, to both of them. And for us, that's what we'll continue to do, and just continue to encourage them to do the same, you know, is to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. That's super important. Can't help anybody if you don't help yourself.
Right.
You know, and then setting those healthy boundaries and just making sure you stick to them, you know. That's what I would leave them with.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you both so much for coming here today and speaking on this subject. I think that people are really going to enjoy learning what you guys have had to say on the matter. And, you know, we're just going to continue to try to help families, try to help addicts and alcoholics get the help that they need. And, yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. All right. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember that growth and recovery are possible, and it can all start today. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Banyan Treatment Centers. Make sure you're subscribing for notifications of new episodes, and don't forget to leave us a review. If you or someone you know is struggling, call us at 888-515-7706. Thanks for joining us today on the Banyan Podcast.